First is Nick, then it's Chris. Then it will print video content. Then it's Norma, I, you, and then Candy. Yes. There we go.
Check, check. Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? Am I seeing audio in Zoom? Yes, I am. Lovely.
I need to be like.
I guess it's kind of a humble brag, but I've been doing talks for like an hour lately. You know, like invited talks. I'm like not used to it. Yeah. But this is like kind of like I'm learning.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'm getting used to it. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a print them on and off. Yeah, I think it's a part.
Every run through that I've done on this,
Get started. Where's the, just waiting for the technology person. Huh? Did she say anything?
No, I think she just probably like there.
Okay. This one, hold on. Are we ready? Okay, great. So I'm going to just do a brief introduction and then Nick will start. Welcome everybody. Thank you all for being here, and I'm very pleased to introduce the second part of this panel entitled "Exploring Cooperative Futures in Culture, Language, and Social Interaction," a panel honoring the legacy of Chuck Goodwin. We have a great lineup of presenters for today, and if you've been here yesterday, you already had very interesting presentations from some of our remote presenters who are still joining us on Zoom. You don't see them here on the screen at this moment, but they are there, and they will chime in also later for the Q&A. So all of the presentations today will be in person, and except for one, Clint Humphrey, who submitted a video, a recording of his presentation that we will play as the second presentation. So without further ado, then I will introduce first Mick Smith from Linköping University in Sweden, and his paper is entitled "Diagrammatic Gesture and the Cooperative Construction of a Meaningful Co-Present World in Scientific Practice." The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Jan, and thank you everyone for coming. So in my talk, I'm going to be focusing on how we can observe cooperative action in a variety of practices, and further argue for its centrality in understanding how phenomena, that is landscapes, objects, and materials, are constituted in scientific practice, specifically in instructional interaction. So cooperativity is central to Chuck's work, from contextual configurations, laminations, environmentally coupled gestures. Chuck has examined the ways in which actions are assembled as collages of different kinds of sign systems and their juxtaposition and mutual elaboration in locally endogenous ways. Participants are argued to build action through cumulative transformations on public substrates constituted through the work by others, whether those be prior speakers, predecessors, whether that's via talk, embodied action, or through structures in the current setting. These practices are integral for instructional interaction. Every community is faced with the task of creating actors capable of recognizing and working with the objects that organize action and sustain their communities. Building knowing actors thus emerges systematically from the cumulative organization of human action. So we're going to be looking at these in 3 different contexts where instructors and learners collaboratively work in understanding and experiencing categorically relevant phenomena in the co-present world. This includes diagrammatic gesture and multisensoriality in instructional interaction and field geology, and in the training of manual skills in anatomical dissection. Just a content warning, we will be looking at clips of cadaver dissection there. So diagrammatic gesture, well, what is it? Well, diagrammatic gesture is a form of diagrammatic reasoning. Diagrammatic reasoning, as described by Peirce and developed by others, is a form of reasoning accomplished through visual modalities as opposed to linguistic or mathematical ones. Diagrams work by depicting phenomena in a visual skeletal form, wherein the relations of parts are perspicuously exhibited so as to make them accessible and actionable. A simple example of this can be seen when we compare the London subway map with its topographic depiction. The topographic depiction is iconic in that it attempts to depict the object through a resemblance, whereas the subway map is diagrammatic. It simplifies this complexity so that the relations and their parts are available for the participants, that being the subway riders.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you pause for a second? I can stop the share and reset it. When you want to play a video, can you let me know when you're about to play video? And I will reset.
Oh, okay.
There's a setting.
So before I play the video?
Before you play the video, just let me know.
I think that might be every slide.
So unfortunately, the people in Zoom are getting very bad quality slides when I optimize the video. The
Okay.
recordings won't be that way. It's just our network is.
Okay. All right, so now it's easier to think of diagrams as graphic objects like a subway map, but the same can be also accomplished in gesture, particularly via cooperative action. We can see this in this excerpt taken from a geology capstone field course where the instructor, Dave, and the students attempt to describe the multiple interactions between a river and a fault scarp. Video. So in through the sequence, we see a complex model of phenomena being built through the gesture. Dave starts by modeling the fault scarp, beginning with the unfaulted surface in line 9. The students follow from this, and then in overlap with Dave, articulate the next event, if faulted, as Dave models that with his arms. As such, the diagram provides points for collaboratively building the sequence of events. We can see this when Sherilyn later formulates the next events in the sequence, the river incision, whereby she builds that from the topography diagrammed to Dave's arms. The diagram works as such through it being simultaneously mutable and immutable, stable for consideration, while editable for revision. Moreover, the gestures function diagrammatically through their providing a means for scrutinizing the landscape. So when Dave asks Sherilyn to identify the uppermost surface pointing his arm, she confirms it as first, the original, also pointing to his arm, before responding with a point upper to the uppermost layer of the surface itself. When Dave then later asks her to identify another surface, she recreates this river incision while looking to the landscape. And in doing so, uses that gesture as a means for scrutinizing the landscape and its fit with the gestural depiction and vice versa. So in a simple way, we see the diagram being constructed using the same practice as Chuck describes in his earlier work on environmentally coupled gestures, wherein participants build semiotic complexes through language, gesture, and co-present structure. As we see, however, the participants can build ever increasingly complex forms through cooperative action. As such, Dave doesn't just depict a faulted scarp, he holds it in place for his co-participants' use and reuse. And in turn, Cheryl can cooperatively add to it, building a complex multi-party gestural diagram. Second, we can observe the indirect relation between the gesture, both in the diagram and the points, and the local structure and the environment, at least with the little steps in between. When Sherilyn points to Dave's arm, she indexes the diagram, not his arm. And when she points to the landscape, she does so as a response to the question about the diagram itself. As such, that we see the diagram working as a mediator between the participants' indexical work and their reference in the landscape, allowing the participants to analyze the diagram somewhat asynchronously from its correspondence with the environment. Finally, we see the diagrammatic gestures working as a representation only insofar as they provide tools for perceiving and assessing relevant structure of the landscape. In this way, they can be likened to the manual practices artists use for measuring composition. Here, however, the landscape is being tested against the model itself, and vice versa. As such, it is indexical as it is an iconic, and moreover, it's inherently an iterative object built for its continual transformation. So turning to multisensoriality, we can note that objects, materials, and phenomena gain their intelligibility from their situatedness in a diverse range of material, sensorial, and linguistic practices. This is especially true in scientific practices where practitioners make phenomena discursively co-present and thus actionable for others, particularly is something useful for learners. We'll look at this with tactility. Here we have Jack wearing a GoPro camera and Thomas, a computer scientist, examine a large exposed fault where Jack sees fault gouge.
So this is where the gouge is coming down. So this stuff is the fault gouge. Yeah, with chunks of, more intact rock.
So Jack begins by pointing the gouge coming down, tracing its path along the rock. Afterwards, he then begins to pick and scratch at the gouge. Now, gouge itself is defined as a loose, unconsolidated rock that consists both of fine particulate as well as larger, coarser chunks of intact rock. But his talk provides very little of this referential content. Rather, the way in which he physically manipulates the gouge ostensibly demonstrates the relevant aspects of its definition for him. So he first pushes against it with his fingertips, dislodging this finer material before picking at the gouge with his thumbs and forefingers, breaking off these larger pieces. Thomas follows Jack's description with, yeah, it's just clay at this point. And in doing so, reaches up and presses against the gouge in a similar manner to Jack. But in doing so, only focuses on the finer particulate as opposed to these looser pieces. Jack agrees with Thomas's formulation, but then also incrementally extends it, recompleting it and providing for the fuller description of gouge as consisting of both fine particulate and larger, coarser intact chunks. This is complemented in the way Jack manipulates the gouge, whereby his tactile actions respecify the aspects of the gouge that had been previously left unspecified. So through these tactile depictions, participants reveal qualities for co-present objects through observable ways in which they kinesthetically operate on them. Indeed, this is kind of what mimes are working with when they perform their illusions. They interact with objects in ways that contradict how we expect those objects to behave. And this suggests that a generic aspect of how these objects are revealed, whether that be their texture, the coherence, or so on, is accomplished through the perceptible and expectable consequences that we take objects to have for how others perceptibly lift, touch, pick, prod, and otherwise manipulate them. These actions, these depictions, oh, sorry, no. Sorry. These depictions are already operating within an organized process. We can look at Jack's initial tracing as being an environmentally coupled gesture, where he locates this physical structure of the fault gouge as it extends on the rock. But when he starts picking at the rock, he reveals kinematic structures that wouldn't otherwise be accessible to Thomas. And in doing so, both participants build on the semiotic complex by adding layers and layers of meaning. This is crucial in these situated learning experiences where knowledge is embodied in material in addition to being conceptual. Lastly, we'll look at the training of anatomists in dissection on cadavers in Sweden and examine the practices that participants use for mobilizing learners' tactile experiences for their work. Here we have an instructor guiding a learner on how to identify and distinguish a vein from its surrounding fatty tissue. In doing so, she'll direct him not only on how to see the relevant difference, but more so on how to feel it. So in dissecting the vein from the surrounding fatty tissue, the student has to necessarily be able to tell the difference between the two. This is difficult, however, as what the participants see is not so clear as what we might expect in an anatomical drawing. So while the instructor begins with formulating what the learner might see, the overall aim of the lesson is rather in getting him to feel the difference. In doing so, she describes what can be felt while doing the dissection. You can almost feel it if you do it like this, while simultaneously demonstrating the action. When the student attempts to do the same, the instructor, however, redirects the student to close and then open his forceps, explicitly connecting that to how he then should feel a strain or pressure down, thereby indexically tying the action to a resultant experience. The instructor intervenes again, now asking if she can manually guide the student's hand. In doing so, she again reformulates how in moving the scissors, he should be able to feel something. If you hold this then, and then we take it in there, then you feel. The instructor finally formulates what the ultimate relevance of this is. There it is resistance, it's not fat. In doing so, labels the structure for the student at the end of this process. So in through the interaction, we see the participants cooperatively working towards revealing a structure that while may have been perceptible for the instructor was not perceptible as readily for the learner. In doing so, they move iteratively from tactile action to structure to experience and finally to its categorical definition. And if we expand this out and look at the whole sequence, this happens over and over again. It's not necessarily that the student has learned how to identify the nerve, as that kind of depends on having a large inventory of experiences as the instructor was, but it does provide for occasioning these discoveries and these experiences over and over, which is really kind of the goal of this exercise or the instruction. So in conclusion, we could see that learners' skill sets are developed through cooperative action where interactants cooperate on prior displays of understanding and experience of a given phenomena, and where possible, use and reuse and transform those in subsequent instruction. These instructional practices reveal aspects of the phenomena, making that accessible and actionable for the learner, and provides opportunities not just for demonstrating their competence, but for occasioning their experience of the phenomena as categorically relevant in the first instance. And through this cooperative action, we observe instructors and learners calibrating their experiences of the world and the distinct phenomenal objects that populate their world and sustain their communities of practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. We do have a brief moment for questions immediately relevant to the presentation. There will also be more time for a general discussion at the end, but if anybody wants to ask a questions, please use the room mic. I will also monitor the Zoom room. If not, we can also move on to the next presentation.
Before you start, I need to swap out a cable, so give me 1 moment. I might drop out of this call.
Thank you for your patience.
Recording in progress.
Okay, do you want to introduce?
Yes, great. Okay, we're back. So our next presentation is by Clint Humphrey from Northern Arizona University, and it is entitled "Cooperative Action, Semiotic Ecologies, and the Emergence of Unskilled Bodies." Unfortunately, Clint is not able to be here today, either in person or virtually, but he was so kind to pre-record a video of his presentation, which we will watch right now.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. Really excited to be part of this panel. I want to say thanks to the organizers. I'm very happy to be celebrating Chuck's work. I'm going to do something a little unusual today. I'm going to present a kind of vignette, a ethnographic narrative that kind of demonstrates the point that I'm trying to make. But first, I'm going to give you an overview of the kind of work that I've been doing and how it's connected to Chuck's work. And when I go into the narrative, hopefully you can read between the lines and see the connections to Chuck's work. I do my work on the Caribbean coast, the Atlantic coast of Central America, working with these folks, lobster divers, who are trying to harvest lobster to make cash. They're doing this commercially. There's very high rates of decompression sickness among this group of folks. Most of them identify as mosquito, and they also identify as indigenous to this region. And you can see the illustration here that these divers are not working with buoyancy compensators and all the other equipment that indicates air pressure and how much nitrogen is in your system. And so the kind of overriding question was kind of simple. How do you do this, right? How are you able to do this without this equipment? And I wanted to look very closely at the embodied practices. And it was important to me to that be my starting point, to study the body and embodiment by looking very closely at the practices. So I included some quotes from Chuck here. There's so many that I could have used, but I like the professional vision definition, transforming sensory experience into types and the creation of competent inhabitants. This poses for every community the task of building competent member with skills and knowledge required to see and act in the world, to accomplish those culturally relevant activities. So this was really my link to Chuck's work. I'm studying an architecture perception, as he might call it, right? How are the senses and forms of perception created, constructed, constituted through forms of embodied practice? And so, so folks are able to extend, right? These divers are able to extend and navigate this very otherworldly and challenging and dangerous otherworldly space. And so I looked at things like this headfirst descent, and so much came from these kinds of analyses of just the headfirst descent. You know, it structured the way they saw the ocean floor, their visual field, and how they were able to detect distributions of light in different ways to navigate the underwater world. And it structured the way that they were breathing to be able to control the movement and position of their bodies. And this all led to ways of understanding the movement of air that you're breathing, but also nitrogen in the system that takes the forms of stiffness and pain and heat in the body, and how they're moving through the body. Everything's moving in the way these folks describe what they do and how they're doing it. And so I was very interested in looking closely at these embodied practices to demonstrate how these divers come to sense, perceive, and navigate this otherworldly space to get their work done. And looking at things like headfirst descent were very important. And then there's communication, right? These divers are usually working alone underwater, but the guys at the surface who are in the skiff are reading, they're looking at the bubbles that make it to the surface, and they can tell what the diver is doing a lot of the time by looking at the bubbles, right? The significance of the bubbles reaching the surface. Well, they know where he's located, but they can also detect, according to the size and shape of the bubble, how deep he might be. And if it's in one place, they know that he's harvesting lobster, and then they might navigate their skiff between the sun and the bubbles, so the diver knows that the skiff is still there and they haven't lost him. So this really complex forms of communication, even right between this vast space between the diver at the bottom of the ocean and the skiff at the surface. So with that, I want to go into my narrative so I have enough time to finish it, but just keep in mind that you'll have to read between the lines a little bit to see the connections to check, but it's really about sensory perception and how it becomes structured through practices and how it links you in a very specific kind of way. Well, it creates a semiotic ecology, but then it connects you to the environment in a very specific kind of way. Okay, my narrative. It was an early Sunday morning in late August, and I was making my way down a narrow path to Darwin's house. Darwin, a successful local lobster diver, had graciously invited me to accompany his lobster diving crew so I could continue my ethnographic research at sea. By accompanying Darwin, I would witness firsthand how these divers are able to accomplish their dangerous work and manage the inherent illnesses. When I made it to Darwin's house, he was standing on the porch displaying an unfamiliar expression on his face. "Are we ready to go?" I asked. He smiled and shook his head. "Not today," he said. He then explained how a marble got stuck in his son's nose and he was at the clinic all night, was tired. I confessed that I was somewhat happy that we were not going out to sea. I was tired. My body was aching from a full week of accompanying them on their dive skiff. Though my pain was not the result of scuba diving, it was the outcome of being thrown around the skiff as it hurtled over the ocean swells at full throttle. We began a conversation on the porch. Darwin explained that even if he had not spent the night at the clinic, it would be best to take a day off diving. Sometimes you need to rest the body, he said. He then began rotating his arms at the shoulders, making large circles. I asked if he was feeling pain. Lobster divers often feel pain first in the joints. "The pain is good," he said with a large smile. "The north wind is coming," he assured me. Finding lobster in July and August, the beginning of the lobster season, can be difficult for divers and lobster trappers. Everyone on the island was waiting for the north wind, a sign that migrating lobster would soon arrive from the north. "The pain is good because you earned it?" I asked, making the mistake of thinking that he was simply taking pride in how hard he had worked all week. "No, real divers," he said, "know when the north wind is coming. You can feel it. You know when the lobster are coming before anyone, and we know how they are coming." "How do you know?" I asked. "The pressure is changing and the currents are changing," he said. "Do you mean the pressure you feel underwater?" I asked. "No, this pressure," he said, putting his hands out with his palms up. Over the coming months, I slowly pieced together the complex ways that these divers come to sense changes in atmospheric pressure and how movements of pain index weather patterns and the pattern movements of lobster. The pressure that Darwin was referring to on that day in August is often described as barometric pressure. It is the atmospheric pressure at sea level and above. The north winds had not yet arrived, but he could feel them approaching even in their absence. The ambient pressure, or breeze, as divers usually call it, was in flux. These divers are particularly sensitive to changes in atmospheric pressure above and below the sea for at least two reasons. One, the high levels of nitrogen regularly absorbed into the bodily tissues because of the extreme atmospheric pressure experienced at undersea depths can be degenerative. Blood flow to the joints, for example, can be compromised, having permanent degenerative effects and bringing on bouts of chronic pain, even after one gives up diving. Two, as mentioned earlier, divers must attend to fluctuations in internal pressure and external atmospheric pressure as they dive, if they are to monitor and manage their ailments to survive each dangerous day of diving for lobster. Again, they don't have the same equipment that I would use as a diver that was trained in the US and received his equipment there. The north and northwest, to the north and northwest, large tropical storms were developing, and Darwin's fluctuating pain in his shoulders was indicating these changes in weather patterns by way of contiguity. He had made himself particularly sensitive to these changes during those weeks because he had purposely pushed his ailing body, diving deeper waters in search of local rock lobster. He was enduring more pain on a daily basis, but the pain was considered good in the way, that's in quotes, he knows that it's degenerative and can be very problematic, in the way that it informed him of when migrating lobster would arrive. This was not the life-threatening, intense pain that forecloses possibilities and horizons for individuals that anthropologists, medical anthropologists often study. But it was opening up possibilities and a way of understanding process by way of specific embodied practices that attuned the senses in a very specific way. The arrival of cool undersea currents moving from north to south encountered during these deep dives also confirmed that the north winds and migrating lobster would soon arrive. Lobster divers are particularly sensitive to slight changes in the undersea currents. They often swim into the current to assist in stabilizing the body and reorganizing sensory modalities associated with proprioception. This encouraged him to continue paying the daily expenses of running a lobster skiff. He knew that much like himself and the lobster would sense changes in water temperature, currents, and atmospheric pressure and begin their journey south. Diver and lobster sensibilities and courses of action, though in many ways vastly different, of course, had become interconnected through physical global process and the emergence of complex semiotic ecologies. Darwin's embodied navigations of extreme environments where he experienced profound fluctuations in atmospheric pressure inskilled the body in a way that facilitated a sensorial extension into an otherworldly environment. A complex semiotic ecology emerged based on contiguity across vast expanses of time and space. Experiences of pain and pressure indexed storms developing hundreds of miles to the northwest and currents and lobster moving 100 feet below the sea. His undersea navigations revealed healthy reefs and habitats that would attract migrating lobster. He took advantage of the currents to establish control of his body while undersea and knew that the migrating lobster would also take advantage of the currents to assist their movements, especially when they are migrating from north to south. Just as nitrogen, or one's internal breeze, as they would refer to it, everything's moving, right? It's the moving body through time and space and environment, is finding a path through the bloodstream in connection to fluctuating atmospheric pressure. So are the lobster finding a path along the bottom of the sea in connection to atmospheric pressure. Lobster divers and lobsters directing their courses of action through sensations and their contiguous indexical relationships to global movements of air, seasonal changes in water temperature, fluctuating atmospheric pressure, and redirected oceanic currents. For the lobster diver, these contiguous relationships and semiotic ecologies are not inherent or instinctual, but grown through culturally mediated embodied interaction, resulting in a process of enskillment that facilitates the emergence of a complex semiotic ecology connected to one's goals. I'm really trying to link to, or I think that passage links to Chuck and Tim Ingold. Unlike the lobster, pain takes on a moral valence and a symbolic signification as useful in the way it helps determine successful decisions in regard to economic practices. As we sat on the porch talking that day, Darwin warned that I too would soon be feeling pain with the north winds. The weather was going to get more intense and I would be thrown around the skiff more than ever trying to navigate that intense weather. But my pain, although it would increase, would never connect to phenomena connecting to the arrival of lobsters. as Darwin's did. I'm not of the sea of the way that he is, right? He perceives it and extends into it sensorially in a very different way than I'm capable of doing with the tools, the materiality, and the ways in which I navigate that space. Okay, I'm trying to be mindful of time here, so I will leave it there. Please contact me if you have any questions or comments or want to discuss any of this. In the meantime, take care.
That was wonderful. Our next speaker is Norma Mendoza-Denton. I think we need to swap equipment. Yes. If you have questions for Clint's presentation, don't hesitate to drop him an email. He'll be happy to respond virtually. So, okay, yeah. Our next presentation is by Norma Mendoza-Denton from the University of California, Los Angeles, and it is entitled Collaborating on Embodied Activity as a No-Body, Non-Body.
I'm hoping to see my my PowerPoint. Does that work? There we go. Thank you to everyone. I just want to say that this talk has been greatly inspired by the work of Chuck and Candy Goodwin. I was able to attend one summer class with them at the Linguistics Institute in New Mexico, but it really was like the class that changed the course of my entire career, because afterwards I was like, oh my God, I have to change everything I'm doing now. So they have been very generous mentors in the process and colleagues. And I've been very fortunate to work with them and also to be influenced by a lot of the students that I've met along the way. And so we'll talk more. Okay, so here you can see all the different types of work that are going into this presentation, and it has been set up so beautifully by the previous presenter. So the work with Chill, the work with the airplane operators, the architecture for perception, the girls and the hopscotch work, all of that you should sort of think about in the back of your mind as I make my way through these slides. I also want to thank Invoke, all the members of the Co-op Action Lab with whom we work every week. Candy runs this incredible lab space, and especially Niels Cloate and Maria Eforeva, who have been working in the virtual reality space. I have all these research assistants for these projects. I have a new language, electronic gaming, and interaction technologies lab that I've called the Legit Lab. And a resident gaming consultant at MG Stardine. Okay, so human action is constructed through the systematic use of public signs and diverse media with quite different properties that mutually elaborate each other, and is thus intrinsically embodied, multimodal, and tied to the world where action is occurring, cooperative and distributed. But what happens when you don't have a body to orient others to, or you're working in a situation where your own body and its proprioception is unfamiliar to you? And here I'm going to turn to the literature on post-humanism, where this particular book, Moravec, 1990, Mind Children, Moravec saw that one could transcend the body. Eventually, technology would be such that you would just not even need your body and go out and be like able to sort of upload your knowledge. And this particular premise has been taken up by a TV show on television right now called Upload, where the main character dies and his consciousness is uploaded, but all of the messed up stuff about our world is reproduced in this virtual consciousness. So it works kind of like your phone plan. Like if you have really crappy phone plan, you only are in a white room. And then if you have a really great phone plan, you're in like this, vast state. This is all after death, right? And interacting with all the other dead consciousnesses. And your living relatives can visit you through virtual reality headsets. But this recalls some of the work of Buchanan from 1997 that talks about, what is embodiment? It's not so much about what is the body itself, but what can a body do? I also want to recall here some of the work of Safiya Noble on algorithms of oppression, right? Where we take these technologies that appear to be neutral, right? I'm just going to do a Google search. But when you do a Google search, the fact that people are paid and they will pay for racist content, for sexist content, for discriminatory content, bumps up your Google search. So you wind up, if you type out, why are Black women so, you start getting all kinds of invective, right? You can't, at the time that Safiya Noble started her work, and she had a young Black girl, her daughter, it was very hard for her to find educational opportunities for Black girls through these kinds of search engines. And this is what motivated her to write Algorithms of Oppression. I'm also influenced by Deleuze and Guattari and their idea of body with organs and body without organs. So body with organs would be like your organic, regular body, your body self. But the body without organs is the embodied subjectivity that results from the tension between the sociocultural and the biophysical. So in fact, the body without organs is asymptotic and ongoing. It's an ongoing, never achievable, never quite completed project. And we work through these projects by deterritorialization and reterritorialization, these active processes of reframing that embodied subjectivity according to external agents or pressures, right? So for instance, this is a very common example, that understanding that I'm supposed to be Mexican. This never came up, of course, when I grew up in Mexico, right? This only came up in the US. Oh, you're Mexican, like I can't pronounce your name. Let me re-territorialize you. You are now a foreigner. It's like, what? Okay, so my name's no longer Catalina. No, you will now be Norma. Okay, that is a body without organs. Like I have been not just interpolated and plucked and defeathered, but also re-territorialized. To be fair, plucked and defeathered is not a Deleuze and Guattari term. It's just me. I'm also inspired by all this work of, and all of us, as you can see in this presentations, they're emerging as incredibly enmeshed. We're all involved with like some of the archaeology theory, some of the embodiment theory, the materiality theory, where we see that we have all these perspectives that converge on the idea that subject and object, mind and matter, human and thing, co-constitute each other. Entanglement is a way of thinking about the ways in which humans and things in their physical connectedness entrap each other. And here you really must read Ian Hodder's work on Turkish sites of, I can never pronounce this, Çatalhöyük. Is that right? Thank you. And this entanglement and relationality is a dialectic of dependence and dependency. So we create these objects like computer networks that get caught, that catch us in a double bind because we depend on the things that depend on the humans, right? Transportation systems, and so on. All of these things that have us entangled. Okay, and I'm going to skip through parts of this just to tell you that for full disclosure, I'm a gamer, but I find that I find that as I get older, I can't realistically run my own subjects, right? Because it's very weird for undergrads and people who have consented to these games to be in a faculty office with a faculty member looking over their shoulder and, you know, and being like, no, bruh. So I leave this to my undergraduate assistants who are amazing, and, you know, graduate assistants too. And so at some point when I first got to UCLA, I reconfigured my faculty office to be the front side of it was a gaming space, and the back side of it behind a curtain was my faculty office. So of course this got very disruptive for my colleagues, and I think that's why they considered giving me a separate space so that I wouldn't be bothering everybody with pizza gaming parties all the time. So we played Mario Party 8 from Nintendo 2007. And I'm just gonna say a couple of words about this. The full write-up of this is in a piece that came out of Journal of Sociolinguistics. And the full piece talks about electrodermal activity and it has like a bio crossover. But the main thing that I wanna tell you is that sexism in a game hurts the participants, right? You can see it, how it basically works under their skin, literally, in the electrical conductivity that you have between the skin and the sensor. So as people start experiencing, you know, sexism and other kinds of social events, their reactivity changes. So anyway, that's best explained in the written out form of this. But here I'm just trying to set it up to tell you that this is the best-selling game of the year that it was released in 2007, ranks among the top 10 in video games and sales with over 8 million copies worldwide. And we chose this game because it has both cooperative and competitive dimensions, right? So it's no use to choose a game where you just play side by side, and that's not cooperation, right? That's like individual playing. You're just in a larger world. But for this, I'm interested in cooperation and competition and all of those good, you know, ethnomethodological kinds of things. So, you know, trying to design sort of naturalistic, but really quasi-experimental situations where we recruit gamers to have gaming sessions. We provide food. The place is meant to look a little bit like an undergrad space. You know, I have those really, the lights that like twinkle on and off, and, you know, old couches, and Mick donated a piece of furniture. So yeah, anyway, so the participants for this first clip that I'm going to show you came from 2 friendship groups. And what I want to show you here is just a very small clip of them playing this shake the can game, where you take the Wiimote, it's a remote that looks like this, and you shake it as fast as you can. So we have the participants trying to gear up.
Oh, I like this. You just shake as fast, just shake boot.
You gotta jerk it?
Yeah, I mean.
If you want to say it like that, go ahead.
I didn't mean it like that. You're the one who said this connotation.
Well, I said shake.
I mean, there was a bunch of different words.
Mario was saying do this.
I gotta press
this is what we gotta do. This is all you do.
It looks like
This is all you do all day. So you should be a master of this.
It looks like a soda can.
All right,
Becky, you have to beat us already.
Huh?
You have to beat us already.
Bro, right now, watch this.
start the game. Start it.
Well, you should, because
Started.
everybody's laughing.
It's okay. We'll use that to our advantage.
We're gonna like make the camera fall. We're guys.
See, he said it.
Right.
Oh, it is a soda can.
I told you it's a soda can.
Okay. Anyway, that goes on. And where would we be if this were not registered already and available as a mug from Urban Dictionary, where Shake It Up comes from the game Shake It Up on Mario Party 8 for the Wii, in which a player must shake his or her can for 5 seconds, and whoever has the highest stream wins. Naturally, this became a great innuendo for jerking off. Now, this had several different types of effects. For the man who had a female friend, it completely changed his interaction. And, that is shown in the article, analyzing his laughter and his coughing and body stuff. But for Ruth, the woman, she was interested in playing it cool. She says, I did a post interview with her. So I was definitely feeling the adrenaline when we were playing the game again. And like, I wanted to win. And so I knew he was good at the game. And I was like, oh, you're good at this game. We got this. But the joke, I felt like the joke was okay. And then I think I started quitting down once he said like, on you, because, I think it's harmless when he references to masturbation. That's okay. I just think, I don't like the idea of like using it as a kind of using it in derogatory form. Nah. I think I was just completely disinterested at that point. I wanted to focus on the game. You were over it? Yeah, I was just over that joke. I mean, it's fine. Everyone can engage in what they want. I won't say anything. Right? So the pressures that come when you're a woman in this kind of space, but in virtual reality, it's a little bit different because you have a computer generated environment with scenes and objects that appear to be real and make the user feel that they are immersed in their surrounding environments, and you wear a headset. So the value of the VR and AR industry in 2020 is massive. And as you know, it's only getting bigger. About 80% of the units that have been sold, almost 2 million, are Oculus headsets. So this is a game that we're playing. We're playing Population One. It's a multiplayer first-person shooter. Battle Royale means there's only one person left at the end. Style game, and players are assigned into squads. So in this game, you can climb anything, you can fly around, you switch weapons by manipulating your controls, you eat food to heal, and you can resurrect within your team. It has haptic feedback through the controllers, and sometimes people wear, other kinds of things like just paraphernalia to get the haptic feedback. And there's in-game graphics and sound to tell you when you're hurt or you need help. So there's sounds that are only audible to the player. They include control pings and health warnings. And then there are sounds where everyone can hear them. And they include battle sounds and the microphones of the whole team, right? So basically, when you play this game, you meet all of these randos, like random people that are playing with you, and you don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. And there's been such a brouhaha about sexism in these games and women getting harassed. And in fact, probably about a year and a half ago, there was a big report of a woman getting harassed in a video game. It was in this game. But I think that the programmers of this game are really trying to make it so that, if you have a female avatar, it's not necessarily the case that you're going to have a female body, because the avatars, you achieve the skins based on skill, not on gender, right? So they're trying to, consciously aiming for gender balance and racial diversity. So of 29 available skins in 2021, they were balanced between male and female, and with one scarecrow. You can unlock the skins through purchase and by progressing up the 60 levels. So there's little correlation between character appearance and gender. And the female avatars in this game are not, they're not dressed in skimpy clothing, right? They're just dressed like, like you might be dressed if you went out to kill a bunch of zombies. Yeah. So, but, in practice, the default assumption is that players are male. And often you start the games with people addressing each other as bros and dudes. So I'm going to quickly run through a couple of little things about this, right? Okay, so here's a little bit of gameplay.
Hello?
Yeah, I see it now. What button?
Yeah.
Are you already? Yeah.
Bro. Don't be quiet with these. Oh, there she is.
Okay.
Got a yellow hattie up on top there.
I can't.
I got a yellow fatty. Hey, get them.
Yeah.
They're inside.
I'm like stuck in the ground.
Got one. Got two almost. They're coming in through that. I don't even know
and I
which-
think
that's right or left. I
gameplay
can't
is
help
starting already too.
it.
No, I'm
Okay, just a couple of seconds of that. Just to let you know that there's all of this reuse with transformation, repetition that creates ties across utterances. But here there's actually two separate conversations going on. There's the conversation between the main room where people are trying to kill each other. And then there's the byplay of the newbies, the noobs that are trying to figure out the controllers. But you can still see that there's reuse with transformation across these conversations. And if I can just have one more small minute, I want to play you this next little piece of this next interaction.
Should I go on the? Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Do you look down the sights when you use a rifle? Like, do you look at the red dot? Because that's helpful,
yeah.
especially for long range.
Wait, which should I take, the S85 or the AWP?
Whichever one you feel better with.
Okay, yeah. I had the one I feel most best with equipped. Bruh! I just had a bright moment. If you know what they are, probably do.
What is it?
Wait, are you American?
I'm Floridian.
Oh.
What's a
I was about to say, if you're American, you call them chips instead of Christmas Pinchy Munchy. Cheshire Queen's Lovely Delights. That's a bit cringe, isn't it, bro? Right, I'm at the rooftop. Someone mark an area where they've seen over like about 4 people. But then I'll look out over there. Time to lay back and relax.
Shoot. There's a guy in the parking lot next to the fried chicken place.
All right. Oh, flipper, dipper, eggs, and flipper. I fell.
I saw that.
Wait, are you the winter gamer?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So the point here of this is that, sometimes when you're a woman in these spaces, people are bringing out everything that they can, right, to get essentially to stop harassment. So she is talking in memes. So this British meme, you call these chips, is a famous British meme that came out about a year ago. And this flippa, eggs and dippa is another meme, but there's even a name for this specific type of aesthetic. It's called a bra girl, who top tier sense of humor and music taste, mutters bra after anything inconvenient happens, speaks in TikTok references, and finds herself talking in a British accent very often. Right, so we have all of these sort of collection of intertextualities, both within the game and outside of the game. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Norma. Are there any questions directly for her? Not, we can move on to our next presentation by Slobe, also from the University of California, Los Angeles, which is entitled Inhabiting an Uncertain Present, Classroom Interactions During Chile's 2019 Estallido Social.
Okay, I have to set up too a little bit. Okay, and if I go into presenter mode, I'll be able to see this, right? This isn't what it looked like before. Oh, maybe that's better. Okay. Okay, can everybody see this? Yes. All right. Let me get my notes ready. Oh, I'm short. Okay, cool. Just FYI, before I get started, I have made some transcripts available on my website. You can find them using this QR code or by going to tyannaSlobe.com/SLA2022. The video that I'm showing, they're in English and in Spanish, and I have subtitled the videos, but they're very fast. And we are going to zoom into specific interactions in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to make this available in case you want to follow along on your own. So today I'm going to talk about my dissertation fieldwork in Santiago, Chile, which because of a months-long political uprising was very chaotic. To say the least. Charles Goodwin's work and my training at UCLA on cooperative action and data collection and analysis methods helped ground me and is still helping me get through it as I write my dissertation. This is very much a work in progress. Right now, I came back from Chile from fieldwork 2 weeks ago. So I knew how to record, and I knew that I would be able to figure out what to focus on later because I knew that there is order in chaos, because even when interaction, no matter the scale of the interaction, is chaotic, we can find order through analysis of cooperative interaction or cooperative action. So in October 2019, the Santiago Metro announced a 30 peso ride fare increase, which is the equivalent of about 4 US cents. Students, mostly from public high schools in Santiago Centro, organized evasiones masivas to protest the cost of living increases, not just in relation to the metro, although it took place in the metro, the cost of living in general. The evasiones, mass fare evasions, consisted of students meeting outside of metro stations after school, rushing the stations, jumping over turnstiles, dancing on platforms, and boarding trains. The government sent riot police to metro stations to stop the protests. Things escalated, and then on the afternoon of October 18th, Santiago erupted into riots. The city's public transportation system collapsed as dozens of stations, trains, and buses were burned or damaged. President Piñera declared a state of emergency, implemented a curfew, a mandatory curfew, and deployed soldiers to the streets of Santiago for the first time since the end of Chile's military dictatorship in 1990. Protests continued for months, as did violent confrontations between government forces and civilians. And it was obvious on the first night of what is now referred to as El Estallido Social, so on the 19th. Even then, it was obvious that whatever was happening was motivated by something that was much bigger than a 30 peso metro fare increase. Indeed, within days, protesters adopted the phrase, no son 30 pesos, son 30 años. It's not 30 pesos, it's 30 years. 30 years of living in a democracy that's governed by the economic policies, laws, and institutions that were implemented by Chile's military dictatorship between 1973 and 1990. And so we're going to go back to that. So on September 11th, 1973, a CIA-backed coup overthrew the government of Salvador Allende, who is shown in this top left picture in an artistic rendition during the estallido. The world's first democratically elected socialist president. Under the authoritarian regime of Augusto Pinochet, the military government enacted the world's first government experiment with neoliberalism. Political dissenters were tortured, disappeared, and exiled in the interest of privatizing once public institutions that provided services like education, healthcare, and social security. Pinochet was removed from power in 1990, but many dictatorship-era policies remain unchanged today. And this is in part because Chile is still governed by a constitution that was introduced in 1980 under the military regime. And I'm not going into this, but spoiler alert, the estallido prompted a new constitution, which will hopefully be approved September of this year. But those institutions, the economic and legal policies that motivated the uprising in the first place, related to things like cost of living and class inequalities, those institutions also defined aspects of the uprising. The president had deployed the military. There was a mandatory curfew. People were being arrested and disappearing on large scales. And people were being injured and killed by the military and police. I know this slide is chaotic. That's the point. So this is called my chaos slide, and I'll come back to it. But so my research on student political participation in Chilean high school sheds light on how teenagers jumping over metro turnstiles ended up transforming the political organization of an entire country. I'm interested in how students at an elite private school and in a lower middle class public school in Santiago participated in different ways in the estallido and how they experienced it and how they made sense of it. But this was not my plan for my dissertation. I just happened to be there. I was studying political participation in these two schools in student council meetings. But when this all started happening, these are all videos that I made. You know, I was like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I gonna do? What can I do? Is there, you know, anything? So, like I said, I was studying youth political participation by comparing the organization of 10th grade student council meetings. And I had training from UCLA from being in the presence of Chuck and Candy Goodwin. And so what I did when I was freaking out was go back to methods. And one thing I did was review grant applications that I had written. And I was like, who did I cite? What did I say I was going to do? This is what I'm going to do in this moment. That was not what I expected, but that is happening anyway. And particularly this article recording human interaction in natural settings by Charles Goodwin. And there I am with my camera, scared, going to school. And so the video that we're going to watch is from a history class that I recorded on October 24th in the private school. The day before, there was a meeting and the school's teachers and administrators decided on whether or not to come back at all, if it was safe, and if it was possible, given the chaos in the city. Transportation, for example, is very difficult, and safety concerns. So the military was still deployed at this time, and there were very much still protests. The class that we're going to watch a recording from was a history class. The students were asked to make a timeline of events that had happened leading up to the riots and military deployment until present. In this case, present was October 24th. Yes. The vibe of the class was very much that history is happening now. This was something that the teacher repeated over and over again, and that students should be paying attention because so much was happening and it was very difficult to keep track of, hence the timeline making activity, and everything was very important. It was what was being stressed. So a reminder, you can find a transcript of this video, but let's go ahead and watch it. Hopefully. No. The audio is not working. Oh, like last time. No, it's not. I controlled for that. What do I do? One, I don't know how to do that, but two, when I tried this earlier, it worked. Okay. Sound. Cam links 4K. Okay, cool. Sorry, I'm behind now. There we go.
So, cuando habló Piñera y después cuando estaba con los tres poderes del Estado y habló Piñera y después habló el presidente del Senado y de la Cámara de Diputados, a mí me sorprendió mucho la diferencia entre como la energía que daba Piñera y los otros dos.
Los tres, porque
fueron los tres, porque
ojo, lo que está haciendo Guillermo también, Matías, se va a aprovechar. Lo que está haciendo Guillermo es un helicóptero militar. Está claro, ¿cierto? Ya. Lo que está haciendo Guillermo es interpretación histórica. Entonces, Guillermo se fijó no solamente en las palabras, sino que además en cómo dices o lo intencionalidad que quiero decir. Y eso Guillermo le dio una denominación de Hitler energía.
Okay, so we're going to focus on the helicopter and the sounds of the helicopter as a sonic material aspect of this scene that participants in the video render relevant to the interaction. The helicopter is, of course, a military helicopter. The military had been deployed again for the first time since the dictatorship. And I'm bringing in this quote from Charles Goodwin about resources and solutions from our predecessors and their relevance in structuring the current landscape for action. The helicopter is a military helicopter, as the teacher highlights. The military had been deployed. This was for many people, very reminiscent of the dictatorship. And during the estallido, violence of Chile's past was very relevant. It was relevant in the military and police violence, in protester signs, in street art, and in discourse. And of course, it's always relevant outside of the estallido as well. But it was very on people's minds 24/7. And so by analyzing cooperative action, we can also see how the military and violence became in a way mundane in this mundane conversations and these types of interactions that were happening at the time. So the teacher starts out by talking about Vito's comment. This is supposed to play, oh, it is playing on a loop. Cool, I just couldn't see it. Halfway through, he stops in line, well, where he's like, SS. Halfway through, he stops, he says, SS. Un helicóptero militar. It's a military helicopter. Oh, this is the slide that I thought I was on. There's a pause to reflect on this. It's not just a helicopter, it's a military helicopter. The emphasis on military, which you can see at the end of this rising pitch accent, at the end of this representation of prosody, of intonation, highlights the militarized moment that we were living in at the time. The teacher then asked, "Está claro, cierto?" Is that clear? Asking students to reflect on that fact that a military helicopter was flying over them. Again, highlighting the militarized moment that we were in. The students say yes. And then they immediately, most students at least, immediately turn back to the board where we're looking at this timeline activity that we had been discussing in the first place. And the teacher immediately moves on. He goes back to talking about Vito's point. He reuses the same utterance from before his attention moved to the helicopter, lo que está haciendo Vito es, but of course this utterance is also transformed. As the students look ahead at the task at hand, the timeline, we're all reminded that this history class and this moment in history was a very militarized one. That is my presentation. I know I'm over time, so I'm just going to stop now. But again, this is an attempt to find order in this absolutely chaotic moment and make sense of it. And thank you to Candy Goodwin, and of course also to Charles Goodwin.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Okay, then we'll move on to our next speaker. Well, she's getting ready. Our next presentation is by Sonya Pritzker from the University of Alabama, and her presentation is entitled, "What Would Chuck Do? Cooperative Action in Research and Relationships," and Research on Relationships in parentheses.
I don't have a QR code, but I have transcripts for you.
Yes. I'll post them in the chat of the Zoom as well.
Okay. So this paper considers how foregrounding the temporal unfolding of cooperative action in everyday life both complicates, yes, I'm gonna take this off, and extends our understanding of intimacy, as well as existing scientific approaches to studying it. Specifically, it asks, what would Chuck do with this? This is a graph, and we'll come back to it, depicting the respiratory sinus arrhythmia values for two people, a married couple who participated in the research study that we did. And I just want to note, very much based on our observations and mentorship from everyone in the UCLA self, lab and very much shaped by conversations with Candy, with Eleanor Oakes, with Rena Rapetti, with a lot of folks there. So, so we did interviews, participant in parentheses, we were in people's homes, observation, psychophysiology, and video recordings of 24 couples in the southeastern US interacting at home. We used several biomarkers. Here I want to focus on heart rate variability, which relates to interbeat intervals. And specifically, we focused on the RSA, which is one aspect of HRV. And so important to know here is that RSA values reflect the parasympathetic process of de-arousal, or the braking system that humans have in response to sympathetic nervous arousal. So when we're nervous or triggered or, all those physiological things start happening, our resources that we have to brake. So lower RSA is higher arousal. That's something to keep in mind. And now this was all shaped explicitly by what we've been calling biolinguistic anthropology. My co-PI is a human biologist and anthropologist. And we're thinking of this as a cross-subfield mixed methods approaches, not just one, that integrates biocultural, medical, and linguistic anthropology to understand how culture, biology, and experience co-emerge in moment-to-moment interaction, how, in Chuck's words, language is encountered and lived through as something emerging through time. Okay, so the data that I will show a little bit of here comes from a study where we took some clips from each couple. They were chosen by researchers who were tasked with choosing a significant or typical interaction. The focal interactions are 10 minutes, or the focal interactions are less than 1 minute sometimes to 3 minutes, but each segment includes 10 minutes of surrounding RSA. This is because even though these focal interactions are short, because they're not events with hard boundaries, as in experimental psychophysiology, but rather snapshots drawn from a continual stream of interaction occurring in conjunction with equally continuous physiological co-regulation, this 10-minute RSA window allows us to discern the physiological context within which the focal interaction occurs. And so we were doing ongoing psychophys using a mobile cardio impedance device called the Mindware for each of the days we were there. And it was about 4 or 5 for each couple. So many more hours than most lab research. The overall goal being to really begin an investigation of the pragmatic co-emergence of emotion and physiological activity in particular interactions. Okay, so some background here. Intimacy, of course, is the topic of a lot of anthropological research. The physiology of intimacy research kind of points us to studies of what might be rather framed as the intimate physiology of interaction. And these studies all orient to the idea that all interaction is a physiological experience within which breath, heart rate variability, other biological processes are variably co-regulated. Research conducted primarily in the lab setting and with regards to short prompted interaction has thus shown that synchrony, both in-phase synchrony, so that's the top one, where our physiology goes up and down together, or anti-phase synchrony, where we're kind of going back and forth, but it's very connected, that both of these are associated with increased empathy, greater affiliation, liking, cooperative behavior, and other prosocial effects. There are debates, however, about the ways in which regular patterns of in-phase or anti-phase synchrony contribute to relationship satisfaction over time in couples. Some studies have suggested that it's not always positive, based on surveys of relationship quality, and then 10 minutes in the lab, And they'll make these associations that couples that kind of go up and down together a lot have worse relationships. Other studies have found a different correlation, that couples who co-regulate more have worse relationships. Others have found that there is no link. So it's very clear that underlying some of these debates, that they index different cultural ideologies about intimacy and how it should be. The problem that I want to focus on here, however, is how physiological data collected over longer periods than the usual 10 minutes in the lab raises a broader set of questions, including what and when intimacy is. Okay, so this is a clip from a couple that declined to have their video shown. So I have images that are obscured. This is Eileen and Vlad. They're a white couple that had been together for 10 years. Vlad was more than 10 years older than Eileen, and this provided a ground for their relational narrative, which we got in the couple's interview, about the many ways in which they differed from each other. One difference they enthusiastically agreed upon, for example, was that Eileen was the talker. She was the extroverted one. When Vlad shared that Eileen tended to talk about 4 times more than he did, she agreed, immediately grounding her role as the talker in purported research findings suggesting women talk at least twice as much as men do. Though multiple studies, many of us know, have decidedly disconfirmed this, the popularized notion that women speak more than men seems to constitute a scientific point of reference for Eileen and Vlad. Though they joked about their differences, Eileen and Vlad also highlighted parallels in the way they think about politics, religion, and popular culture, including the fact that they really both embraced an overall rational scientific approach. They also shared numerous hobbies, including a passion for cooking and watching cooking competitions, and highlighted their sense of intimacy and connectedness in several ways. For example, by saying, we're those people. We can go to a party and eat off the same plate. We're like those people, but we can also go our separate ways and it's fine. So this clip comes from about 7:15 p.m. the first night we were there.
Oh, did I tell you ALN sent out the official call for submissions and everything?
Oh, yeah.
Deadline's January 15th. That's not bad, actually. It's a few days later than normal. Usually it's been more like the 10th or the 12th.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that means everyone will totally fucking procrastinate till after New Year's and be like, oh shit, AOM, gotta do something.
Christmas and New Year's and
I wrote the
tigers and bears.
I wrote the first draft of the HRMR over Christmas because I remember I emailed Dr. Harms on Christmas Eve, and he emailed back. I think I told Justin that, and he informed me that we're both sick people.
If you want, we can just have the soup first.
Let's do that. I think that'll be better because we can just let the steaks rest.
Okay. All right, coming back to their physio. Their RSA values, and you have a copy of this as well, for the 10 minutes on the back, I think, surrounding the clip appear to be entirely uncoordinated. With a correlation coefficient of -0.03, it seems as if their physiologies were engaged in 2 entirely different conversations. At first blush, moreover, this observation seems to mirror the interaction in which each partner was continually engaged, or Vlad was continually engaged in tasks, and Eileen kind of kept moving around the kitchen, speaking to his back. So when we looked at the interaction, we kind of thought that they were in alignment. Whereas with couples that showed a lot of synchrony and they were in flow, we could show they were really connected. We could show something about that. But here we thought this matched, and we thought this matched what they said in their interview about how they can be in separate spaces. It doesn't matter. So it's important to foreground that they're in a joint activity. But nonetheless, throughout, Eileen enacts the familiar and comfortable role of talker. Vlad responds minimally, often by overlapping and offering little continuers that function to cede the floor to Eileen. The conversation does peak at a moment of chuckling when Vlad chuckles in response to Eileen's observation that everyone will totally fucking procrastinate, so they laugh together. And this progresses into a rapid back and forth. that is closed off with, with Eileen, who continues talking while Vlad becomes increasingly distracted, offering only a minimal continuer spoken with a downward intonation while Eileen is speaking. When she's concluded her recounting, he does turn towards her, meeting her gaze briefly before shifting topics and directing the conversation towards the soup. He says, adopting a form that prefers a yes response. If you want, we can just eat the soup first. And that yes response is forthcoming. Let's do that. Vlad quickly backpedals here and attempting to propose another alternative. Eileen offers him no room to do so, immediately launching into an argument for eating the soup first, which she thinks will be better. Vlad tries again. Eileen continues, however, notably drawing on terminology that relates to their shared hobby, letting the steaks rest. After a brief pause, she seems to assess that Vlad is not yet convinced. She then shifts to a more experiential argument grounded in reason. If it'll be better, let's have the steaks. We can enjoy the soup first. Vlad, who still isn't completely buying it though, turns away from her to walk over to investigate the steaks, as if to check out her claim that letting them rest was a valid argument. Though arguably appearing to be an instance of Eileen railroading Vlad, who could not seem to get a word in edgewise, this investigation he conducts offers a different perspective on the way that the couple had developed of being a couple in cooperative interaction. So for Eileen and Vlad, the quotidian routine of preparing a meal scaffolds what is arguably an intimate interaction, even while, at least physiologically, they appear to be disconnected. Let's come back here again. So thinking about the physiological asynchrony here. So my co-PI, who is a biologist, always seems to suggest that this example is one of the most difficult that we have in terms of the near zero correlation in physiology. In terms of the question of what Chuck would do, however, I'm compelled to ask here, how does a cooperative approach on the interaction invite a more nuanced interpretation, or at least interrogation of what interaction even is when we include both physio and video? When we recast these data as reflecting a moment within a chain of experience, a relationship, it also compels the question of how bodies, as they show up in particular interactions, bear biological traces of experiences and encounters in both the immediate and deep past, intergenerational, socio-historical, and relational. From here then, we might also be able to productively ask, when is interaction? Or when, better yet, is intimacy? I do have a kind of tentative hypothesis here that has something to do with how the moments of synchrony seen in the lab demonstrate something very important about the ways in which prompted shared tasks and the urgency of need in many of these move people to synchronize as part of a and counter-regulatory process of connecting, empathizing, or working together to solve a common problem. It demonstrates a lot about the ways in which interaction, rather than simply individual will, regulates our physiological, emotion, and phenomenological experience. What they don't tell us about, however, is anything about how all of this works in the temporal context of an ongoing relationship over time. So instead of scaling from these short interactions in the lab to then go look for synchrony and then identify that as connection, I'm thinking about how longer term ethnographies might give us a better sense of perhaps the way couples move, and these are from random segments, the ways in which they might move in and out of various modes of synchrony over time, right? And it also may be the case that there's like a meta pattern that fits them. But the point being here that we can't just scale up from the lab to intimacy in the context of a relationship. So without having yet analyzed all of these data to offer you some sort of a brilliant perspective on the meta-patterned nature of corporeal synchrony, I will just conclude with these questions. Again, what and when is interaction? What becomes possible and impossible in terms of understanding cooperative action when we allow interaction and physiology to co-occur at different timescales? And what, seriously, what would Chuck do? And I just want to end with inviting you all to a lab that, that we have put together to bring together biocultural and linguistic anthropology. It is the Embodiment, Communication, and Health Open Lab, and we have meetings this semester. It's Wednesdays. They are hybrid. We have a website. If you would like to be added, I would love to have you. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Sonya? Otherwise, I will Otherwise, it's my great pleasure to introduce our final speaker of this two-part session, Marjorie H. Goodwin from the University of California, Los Angeles, and she will give a presentation entitled The Interactive Construction of a Celebration, Acts of Surprise, Joy, and Gratitude in Light of an Uncertain Future.
First of all, thanks very much to the organizers for this lovely 2 days of presentations celebrating Chuck's work. It reminds me of themes with variations in the most beautiful way. And now, what I would like to present is not only some of Chuck's ideas, but some of his affective life and exuberance for you all to see. So the question that I have is, how does someone facing an uncertain future at the end of his life, cancer, collaboratively build moments of joy and gratitude? And in this presentation, I'm going to examine the embodied practices and participation frameworks through which Chuck and his friends build such moment in a particular context, a surprise party in his honor. And the occasion for the surprise party was the presentation of a book with articles written by 49 different scholars that illuminated how Chuck's work had been consequential for their own scholarship. And it was a book that was produced in rapid time, 3 months, so that Chuck could read it before he died. And as a ruse to get Chuck out of the house, Mario, Chuck's cardiologist, asked him to have some coffee with him to discuss an article that they were working on. So what we'll investigate is how Chuck, the principal character in the event, takes up affective stances with respect to features of the event organized in his honor, as he produces assessments, greetings, and toasts, and how his actions are ratified to bring off heightened emotional displays on the occasion of celebration. And these occur in both dyadic and multi-party participation frameworks, and we'll see how he moves deftly from one to the other and can even sustain two simultaneously. So there was a vow of secrecy regarding the gathering. Contributors to the book and friends who came, people flew in from Japan, Singapore, and various parts of the US to be there, and guests came with varying understandings of his physical health. So these were, there was considerable anticipation as the guests waited for Chuck. So when all the guests were assembled, Candy phoned Chuck, urging him to come home soon because the dog Tiger was acting strangely. And as he opens the door, Chuck announces, smiling to me, that he's here. And he displayed that he was indeed totally surprised. We need more sound. Yes, the cable's in. Oh, the sound cable. I see what you're saying. Right. Where's that?
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, it's on the other side. Here we go. Okay.
It should be on a headphone port, right? Good.
Okay, let's see. See how it goes. So it's the next one. Oh, we have to do play mode. We should play over there. Play.
Wait, sorry, I don't.
Up here. Play. Okay.
Candy, we're here.
So Chuck's face changed dramatically and displayed the classic features of surprise, as we see in this next Kendon rendition, Ekman rendition. So in response to the spectacle of the surprise party, Chuck produces a series of response cries.
Oh, wow!
So response cries have been defined by Goffman as condensed, truncated forms of discretely articulated, non-lexicalized expressions, or discrete interjections. And he states that response cries are ritualized acts in something like the ethological terms. Okay, in the midst of doing things together then, participants display how they align themselves towards others. As Chuck displays his utter delight, the entire house explodes in clapping and cheers in response to his response cry assessments. And there seems to be a release of what Durkheim calls collective effervescence, a high degree of collective emotional excitement or delirium. The intensity of the expression of Chuck vocally and facially is matched by the intensity of the participants' expressions. And in a gathering like this kind of party, the principal character has the job of showing deference not only to particular individuals, but also to the large assembly group. So how can a speaker address two different participation frameworks simultaneously? And one way that he can do this is by haptically being involved in one dyadic participation framework while orally by talking to the rest of the group. And this is what happens in this example. As you see in this first exclamation of Chuck, oh, and Rory, everybody, oh my gosh. And then Candy says, and people from Japan even. And then Dawn says, Satomi came from Japan. And this is Satomi, who then comes very quickly towards Chuck and they embrace. And in the midst of the embrace, Satomi's doing this creaky voice, as she closes her eyes. And Chuck says, don't know if I can hug everybody. So he's talking to the group while he's also involved in this very intense emotional expression with Satomi.
Oh, and Rory! Everybody! Oh my gosh!
People from Japan even.
Really?
Came from Japan.
Really? Oh, Satomi. Thank you. I can hug people. I don't know if I can hug everybody.
And then notice the gesture that Steve Clayman gives to him. Kind of deflecting the idea that it's necessary to hug everybody. And then Chuck continues, in fact, I can't. John, Eleanor, San Diego.
In fact, I can't. John, Eleanor, San Diego, Sandro, John.
Okay, so the event transforms one in which a single individual is addressed to a move embracing everybody as the addressee. And this ability to be located within two diverse participation frameworks shows a certain virtuosity of handling the choreography that's entailed in being the principal character. He expresses gratitude widely and with finesse, toggling between individual and group frameworks, vocal and haptic modalities. So now we'll look at the whole sequence.
Oh, I'm roaring. Everybody. Oh my gosh.
People from Japan even.
Really?
Sonya came from Japan.
Really? Oh, thank you. I can hug people. I don't know if I can hug everybody. In fact, I can't. John, Eleanor, San Diego.
Okay, a next example shows a similar kind of phenomenon. In 1979, with the interactive construction of a sentence in natural conversation, Chuck showed us how the shape of an utterance is dependent upon the way that recipients attend to it throughout its course. A speaker can append new segments to an emerging sentence in search of appreciative hearership from a recipient. And in the example we're going to look at now, we'll see how the trajectory of a hug, the ways in which it's initiated, executed, and subsequently dismantled are closely attuned to the hug recipient, Chuck's, involvement with other participants at the moment. So as multiple participation frameworks can be in play simultaneously, the body can index haptic engagement with a particular participant, while at the same time engaging with others through visual and oral means, because the voice provides not only a kind of propositional content, but also a mode of affective coloring. So here, what we'll see is this person here, Norma has come from Illinois to visit, and Chuck gives him an exuberant greeting as he turns around. Norma, wow, wow. And then he continues on to talk to the entire group. All I can say is I've never seen a surprise party like this, he says. In the meantime, what Norma does is he's going to be embracing Chuck. You can see in the first frame that he's apart from Chuck, but then he moves very closely toward him with his fingers like this around his shoulder, and then they close up as he gets much closer to him and much more intimate. So let me show that particular sequence now. Whoops.
Norma, wow, wow, wow. All I can say is
so good to see you.
I've never seen a surprise party like this. And completely successful. Thank you.
So the participation framework shifts from a dyadic reading between Norma and Chuck to Chuck's appreciative comment addressed to the entire group. Norma's carefully choreographed embodied actions overlaid with laughter as he disengages from haptic configuration, clear the stage for Chuck's undivided attention to his array of guests. And then in response to the coda of Chuck's talk, completely successful, the assembly responds with enthusiastic clapping and cheering. And then Chuck then expresses his gratitude once more for the surprise party with a joyful smile on his thank you, thank you, thank you. So now we're going to look at this once more in its entirety, and we'll see how the haptic configuration initiated by Norma to Chuck is assembled, dismantled, and exquisitely synchronized with Chuck's expression of gratitude to the larger assembly.
Norma, wow, wow, wow. All I can say is
so good to see you.
I've never seen a surprise party like this. And completely successful. Thank you.
So in these examples, Chuck could participate in both multi-party and dyadic participation frameworks simultaneously. With the body, he embraced Satomi, and he was embraced by Norma. And both in the midst of the hug with Satomi and the half hug with Norma, Chuck spoke to the group. And despite the spontaneity of the moment, dyadic interactions between Chuck and others were carefully orchestrated. Norma bodily entered into and out of the greeting to Chuck at clause boundaries and Chuck's expression of gratitude. Now I'd like to briefly discuss a key concept in Chuck's book, Cooperative Action, which is reuse with transformation. Shortly before the party, our colleague Lourdes de Leon wrote about in an email about visiting her Mayan family after a comadre had passed. She had died at home, and she writes, I found myself very touched by a peaceful, loving, and tender feeling inhabiting the house. I sat there feeling both sad and peaceful as I sensed her presence and her deep connection with family through their offerings and beautiful shrine. The walk from home to the cemetery was smooth as velvet, with a sense of equanimity and acceptance and presence. I was struck by a very strong feeling of being all together, us with her. Bringing offerings every day for 40 days, thereafter every Sunday and on the Day of the Dead, is a very natural way of keeping with the loved ones without feeling the abrupt separation we seem to have in our own culture. I thought of Chuck in the context of his own culture, and I strongly feel that we have a strong, loving community, keeping both him and Candy company. This is crystal clear, among other things, with the magnificent book just edited by Don Favreau in concert with a large web of people that honor Chuck and thank him for his many gifts to our community. This is one of the offerings that show you are with us forever, dear Chuck. I will add to this gift my strong desire of having a shrine for Chuck on the Day of the Dead with my Mayan family. She concludes, and as you walk to the mountains where the spirits meet, we will pray for you and ask for you to wait for us, who will be meeting with you in time and beyond time to rejoice eternally. And here's the remembrance of an offering to Chuck in the Mayan village of Namanchak, the year that he died. So now I want to see how Chuck incorporates Lourdes's note in his vision of his final days of how he wants to spend his life in his toast at the party.
And the other thing I really want to say, and here I'm relying on what Lourdes said about the death of her comadre, I am so happy to see the children here today too, because I envision, I told you this and I'm not trying to be dark, but instead of my life fading out all by myself, like in a hospital room, I envision when my life finally fades out, it fading out in a scene like this that's filled with the life of others, with all sorts of generations. And that seems to be the world that we inhabit, rather than a private world of, pain and death, but a world that is sustained through the richness of other people and their care, concern, intellectual stimulation, and it's the most wonderful thing. Okay.
So Chuck continued to meet with his lab as he grew weaker, though it was now in the bedroom rather than in the lab. And neighbors and hiking friends came to visit him in his last week when he was mostly in bed. And his sister, Pat, over there on the right, who's a hospice nurse, was with us for 2 weeks before his death and for 3 weeks afterwards. And she provided very loving support for both of us. So stories about a peaceful death in Lourdes's emails provided a vision of how to die. The passages from Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh provided me a vision of Chuck always being with us. A friend of mine who's been taking care of her 93-year-old mother, the doctors say that her mother will die any day. Recently, she told her mother, "This body is not exactly yours. Your body is much larger." My friend continued, "When you were young, you were able to teach many people how to cook and do many other things. You made people happy. Now we are doing the same thing. We are continuing the work you've begun. When you were young, you wrote poetry and sang, and now many of us write poems and sing beautifully. You are continuing in us. You are many beings at the same time. This is the meditation on non-self. It helps her mother see that her body is not just a small part of her true self. She understands that when her body departs, she will continue in many other forms." And the lab continued to meet for 2 hours on Wednesdays every week, but it transitioned to Zoom with the onset of the pandemic. and with weekly exchanges, new possibilities for collaboration with colleagues on 5 different continents keep emerging. So in keeping with the Mayan traditions, here's an altar in my kitchen where Chuck is remembered. And here we see Norma and her daughter Maggie as they're about to sing Remember Me to Chuck. And as Mario Ding commented, his cardiologist, the gift of making his dying as part of our living allows us to remember his dying not as a denial of living now, but as a condition of living now more richly. And that becomes a universal concept of being human. Thank you. So much for your love and your continued presence with Chuck's work. Thank you.
Yeah, we are at the end of our 2 sessions, but we do have some time left for questions and general discussion. I hope we can include the people on Zoom as well. So we have 5 minutes. Okay, we have 5 minutes, but that's more than enough, better than nothing. So the floor is open.
Hi, Candy. I have a question for you. Maybe not so much a question as just a reflection, which is that one of the ways that I feel that this community has developed is by us building on Chuck's work and on each other's work. And I think for that reason, the sort of cross-community and intertextuality of Chuck's work extends not just interpersonally, but through, you know, the continuing legacy of what he has given us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Candy, for sharing with us the joy of that moment. With Chuck's joy, it just physically affected all of us in this room. And it was really beautiful, and I'm grateful for that.
Yes, thank you. I just want to sort of thinking about that your final presentation for the 2 panels, and it just exemplifies Chuck's work so perfectly. The layering through a lifetime, the fact that there are 49 authors who came together to show the impact of Chuck's life in their research and in their lives, and in the culmination. And of course, it makes sense that would be Chuck's response to the laminations and the multiple generations present in that room. And also that you would show us and share with us such an intimate space and make that available, because that's been so much of both of your work, is making available intimacy making available intimacy for how we look at what it means to be human, what it means to live. And as you so eloquently stated, also like how to make dying part of living. At least thinking about it in a different way in our, I would say North American or Euro-American cultures, or hegemonic view of that culture. Anyway, it's a very beautiful contribution. I think we're all just very struck emotionally, and so it's a lot to take in. It's it's very sweet, but also it's I guess the sadness too. Even though it is not sad, it is very joyful and is quite a wonderful offering. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Candy, for sharing that with us. Thank you all for putting this together and inviting me to be on the panel. I'm so honored. One of the things that I have realized in the past 10 years or so is that this idea of, in a lot of my work on healing, this idea that it's very self-directed and individual focused. I always found that confusing. I think sometimes it's sold as individual development, but in the context, any therapeutic context, it is Chuck and Candy's work more than anyone's that has made me see that resonance across bodies, that's always happening, and really completely destroyed, thankfully, the idea of an individual self, that we're bodies that are separate from one another. We're so one being. And there are many spiritual teachers who offer that same knowledge. But I'm a methods geek, man. That it's like to be able to draw upon all this literature and then circle things and mark them and talk about it and show where it happens is such a gift to the world. And so I just want to thank you for that. Thank Chuck.
The older we get, the more we learn that it's about other things that we thought when we started our investigations. And one of the things that I've seen within Chuck and Candy's work is that there is love within the work and among the researchers and the subjects. And to have that all come forward, this is a real gift. Our society doesn't like to say scientists are emotional, scientists are passionate. We are. And that cultivation, not just all the intellectual work, but that part of it, I think really is what lifts it to a much higher level. So thank you.
Wanted to thank Candy, and I wanted to thank all of us, and really I wanted to commend us in that I think that we've continuously been accomplishing something that Chuck wished for, which was that he basically continue on in discourse with us, not in our thoughts, but in our dialogue and our ideas. And I think we've accomplished that. Never once have we been a part of these meetings and just eulogized Chuck. I think we've continuously been engaging with him. And as a result, he's been here in a very active way with us.
Okay, thank you all. I think these are beautiful words that conclude the panel today. A few people have chimed in the chat, thanking Candy, and it's great. We see Lourdes on the screen now. Hi. And we have also a chat from Rachel, who says, thank you, Candy and Chuck, and thank you all for the panel. Blessed to witness the different ways in which Chuck's legacy has been inhabited in the work of our community. I think these are nice words of closing. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all in our virtual space for joining us from around the world, and have a wonderful rest of your day and the conference.